200 Facts About World War I. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into one of the most devastating conflicts in human history, World War I. Over the next hour or so, we'll explore 200 fascinating facts about the Great War, from its causes to its lasting impact on our world today. If you're interested in history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Let's get started. The road to war. Fact 1. World War I began on July 28, 1914, when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. This single declaration would set off a chain reaction that pulled in nations from across the globe. Fact 2. The immediate trigger was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. A Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip fired the fatal shots that would change history. Fact 3. Gavrilo Princip was only 19 years old when he assassinated the Archduke. He was actually too young to receive the death penalty under Austrian law, so he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, where he died of tuberculosis in 1918. Fact 4. The assassination almost didn't happen. Earlier that day, another conspirator had thrown a bomb at the Archduke's car, but it bounced off and exploded under the wrong vehicle. Franz Ferdinand's driver then took a wrong turn later, coincidentally stopping right in front of Princip. Fact 5. The complex system of alliances in Europe meant that what started as a regional conflict quickly escalated. The Triple Entente consisted of France, Russia, and Britain, while the Central Powers included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Fact 6. Germany issued a blank check to Austria-Hungary, promising unconditional support for whatever actions they took against Serbia. This emboldened Austria-Hungary to make harsh demands that Serbia couldn't fully accept. Fact 7. By early August 1914, most of Europe was at war. Germany declared war on Russia on August 1st and on France on August 3rd. Britain entered the war on August 4th after Germany invaded neutral Belgium. Early battles and strategy. Fact 8. The German military strategy at the war's outbreak was called the Schlieffen Plan. It called for a quick defeat of France by sweeping through Belgium, then turning to fight Russia in the east. Fact 9. The First Battle of the Marne in September 1914 was crucial. French and British forces stopped the German advance toward Paris, ending any hope of a quick German victory and leading to the development of trench warfare. Fact 10. During the First Battle of the Marne, French commanders actually used taxicabs from Paris to rush 6,000 reserve troops to the front line. This became known as the Taxis of the Marne. Fact 11. By the end of 1914, the Western Front had stabilized into a line of trenches stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss border, approximately 475 miles long. Fact 12. The Eastern Front was vastly different from the Western Front. It stretched over 1,000 miles and featured more mobile warfare rather than the static trench warfare of the West. Fact 13. The Battle of Tannenberg in August 1914 was a devastating defeat for Russia. German forces, led by Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, encircled and destroyed the Russian Second Army, taking over 90,000 prisoners. Trench warfare. Fact 14. Trench warfare became the defining feature of World War I on the Western Front. Soldiers lived in elaborate trench systems that included frontline trenches, support trenches, and reserve trenches. Fact 15. The area between opposing trenches was called no man's land and could range from as little as 30 yards to several hundred yards wide. It was typically filled with barbed wire, shell craters, and the bodies of fallen soldiers. Fact 16. Trench foot was a terrible condition caused by prolonged exposure to damp, unsanitary conditions. Feet would swell, go numb, and in severe cases, gangrene would set in, requiring amputation. Fact 17. Rats were a constant plague in the trenches. Some rats grew as large as cats by feeding on food scraps and corpses. Soldiers tried to control them by shooting, bayoneting, or clubbing them, but the rats always returned. Fact 18. Lice were another persistent problem. Nearly every soldier in the trenches was infested. The lice caused a condition called trench fever, which produced high fever, headaches, and leg pain. Fact 19. Soldiers used a tactic called going over the top, when attacking. They would climb out of their trenches and advance toward enemy lines, often resulting in massive casualties from machine gun fire. Fact 20. The space above the trenches was constantly swept by machine gun fire. German MG-08 machine guns could fire up to 600 rounds per minute, making frontal assaults incredibly deadly. Major battles. Fact 21. The Battle of Verdun, which lasted from February to December 1916, was the longest single battle of World War I. It resulted in over 700,000 casualties and became a symbol of French determination. Fact 22. The German strategy at Verdun was one of attrition. Chief of Staff Erich von Falkenhayn wanted to bleed France white by attacking a position the French would defend at all costs. Fact 23. The phrase, "they shall not pass," became associated with Verdun, though it was actually said at a different location. General Robert Nivelle reportedly said it, and it became a rallying cry for French resistance. Fact 24. The Battle of the Somme began on July 1, 1916, and resulted in the bloodiest day in British military history. On that first day alone, the British Army suffered nearly 60,000 casualties, with almost 20,000 killed. Fact 25. The Battle of the Somme lasted until November 1916 and resulted in over 1 million casualties on all sides. Despite this enormous cost, the Allies gained only about 6 miles of territory. Fact 26. Before the Battle of the Somme, the British detonated 19 massive mines under German positions. The explosion at Hawthorne Ridge was so large it was filmed and remains one of the most iconic pieces of World War I footage. Fact 27. The Third Battle of Ypres, also known as Passchendaele, took place in 1917 in Belgium. The battle is infamous for the terrible mud caused by rain and destroyed drainage systems, which swallowed men, horses, and equipment. Fact 28. At Passchendaele, soldiers could drown in the mud. The shell-torn landscape and constant rain created a swamp-like environment where wounded soldiers who fell off the duckboards could sink and suffocate in the mud. Technological warfare. Fact 29. World War I saw the first large-scale use of chemical weapons. The Germans first used chlorine gas at the Second Battle of Ypres in April 1915, creating a greenish cloud that swept over French and Algerian troops. Fact 30. Mustard gas, introduced in 1917, was particularly horrific. It caused severe blistering of the skin and lungs, could penetrate clothing, and its effects could be delayed for up to 12 hours after exposure. Fact 31. Gas masks became essential equipment for soldiers. Early versions were crude cloth masks soaked in urine or chemicals, but they evolved into sophisticated respirators with filter cartridges. Fact 32. Tanks were first used in combat at the Battle of Flers-Courcelette in September 1916, part of the Somme offensive. The British Mark I tank was slow, unreliable, and mechanically primitive, but it demonstrated the potential of armored warfare. Fact 33. The conditions inside early tanks were nightmarish. Temperatures could reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit, the noise was deafening, and crews were often poisoned by carbon monoxide fumes from the engine. Fact 34. Tanks got their name from a British security measure. To keep their development secret, workers were told they were building water carriers or tanks for Mesopotamia, and the name stuck. Fact 35. Flamethrowers were used extensively by German forces. These terrifying weapons could shoot flames up to 40 meters and were particularly effective at clearing bunkers and trenches. Fact 36. Aircraft played an increasingly important role as the war progressed. At the war's start, planes were used mainly for reconnaissance, but they evolved into fighters, bombers, and ground attack aircraft. Fact 37. The term dogfight comes from World War I aerial combat. Pilots would maneuver their planes in tight, aggressive turns resembling fighting dogs, trying to get behind their opponent to fire. Fact 38. The Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, was the war's top flying ace with 80 confirmed kills. He flew a distinctive bright red Fokker Dr. I triplane and was shot down and killed in April 1918. Fact 39. Submarines, or U-boats as Germany called them, became a major weapon. Germany's policy of unrestricted submarine warfare sinking merchant and passenger ships without warning was a key factor in bringing America into the war. Fact 40. The sinking of the passenger liner RMS Lusitania by a German U-boat in May 1915 killed 1,198 people, including 128 Americans. This incident turned American public opinion strongly against Germany. The Global War. Fact 41. World War I was truly global, with fighting occurring in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific, not just Europe. Colonial troops from across the world participated. Fact 42. Over 1.3 million Indian soldiers served in World War I, fighting in France, Mesopotamia, East Africa, and other theaters. They earned over 11,000 medals for bravery. Fact 43. The Gallipoli Campaign of 1915 to 1916 was an Allied attempt to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war by capturing Constantinople. It ended in disaster, with over 250,000 Allied casualties. Fact 44. The Anzac forces from Australia and New Zealand suffered particularly heavy casualties at Gallipoli. April 25, the date of the landing, is now commemorated as Anzac Day in both countries. Fact 45. The Arab revolt against Ottoman rule was led by figures including T.E. Lawrence, known as Lawrence of Arabia. Arab forces helped the British capture key territories in the Middle East. Fact 46. In East Africa, German commander Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck led a brilliant guerrilla campaign, tying up Allied forces many times larger than his own and remaining undefeated throughout the war. Fact 47. Japan entered the war on the Allied side in 1914, primarily to seize German territories in China and the Pacific. This would have significant implications for the post-war world. Fact 48. The war in the Italian Alps featured unique mountain warfare. Soldiers fought at altitudes over 12,000 feet in freezing conditions, and avalanches killed thousands of troops on both sides. The home front. Fact 49. World War I dramatically changed women's roles in society. With millions of men at the front, women took on jobs previously reserved for men, working in munitions factories, transportation, and agriculture. Fact 50. Munitionettes were women who worked in munitions factories. The work was dangerous, with frequent explosions and exposure to toxic chemicals that could turn their skin yellow, earning them the nickname Canary Girls. Fact 51. Governments used propaganda extensively to maintain morale and encourage enlistment. Posters featuring Lord Kitchener pointing and saying, "Your country needs you," became iconic recruiting tools. Fact 52. Rationing was introduced in many countries as the war dragged on. In Britain, items like sugar, meat, and butter were rationed to ensure fair distribution and support the war effort. Fact 53. The British government introduced conscription in 1916 through the Military Service Act, requiring all single men aged 18 to 41 to serve. This was later extended to married men as casualties mounted. Fact 54. Conscientious objectors who refused military service on moral or religious grounds faced harsh treatment. Many were imprisoned, forced into hard labor, or subjected to public humiliation. Fact 55. War bonds were sold to citizens to help finance the massive cost of the war. Governments used emotional appeals and celebrity endorsements to encourage people to do their part. Medical advances and casualties. Fact 56. World War I led to significant advances in medicine and surgery. The urgent need to treat massive numbers of wounded soldiers drove innovation in blood transfusion, plastic surgery, and prosthetics. Fact 57. Shell shock, now recognized as PTSD, was a major problem. Soldiers experienced tremors, nightmares, and psychological breakdown from the constant stress of bombardment and combat. Fact 58. Early in the war, shell shock was poorly understood. Some sufferers were accused of cowardice and even executed. As the war progressed, it began to be recognized as a legitimate medical condition. Fact 59. The mortality rate from wounds improved significantly during the war due to better medical practices. Techniques like debridement, the Karel-Dakin method for cleaning wounds, and improved triage saved countless lives. Fact 60. Facial injuries were common due to trench warfare. Harold Gillies pioneered plastic surgery techniques to reconstruct the faces of wounded soldiers, establishing the foundations of modern plastic surgery. Fact 61. An estimated 10 million soldiers died during World War I. Additionally, about 7 million civilians died, and the 1918 flu pandemic, spread partly by troop movements, killed another 50 to 100 million people worldwide. Fact 62. The war created millions of refugees. In Belgium alone, over 1.5 million people fled German occupation. Armenians faced genocide at the hands of the Ottoman Empire, with over 1 million killed. America enters the war. Fact 63. The United States remained neutral for the first 3 years of the war. President Woodrow Wilson campaigned for re-election in 1916 with the slogan, "He kept us out of war." Fact 64. The Zimmermann telegram was a secret diplomatic communication from Germany to Mexico, proposing a military alliance against the United States. Its interception and publication in March 1917 outraged Americans. Fact 65. The United States declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917. However, it would take months to train and transport American forces to Europe in significant numbers. Fact 66. The American Expeditionary Forces, led by General John J. Pershing, insisted on maintaining separate American units rather than being absorbed into French and British commands. Pershing wanted Americans to fight as Americans. Fact 67. The first major American offensive was at Cantigny in May 1918. Though small in scale, it was an important symbolic victory that proved American forces could fight effectively. Fact 68. The Battle of Belleau Wood in June 1918 became legendary in Marine Corps history. Marines earned the nickname Devil Dogs, allegedly given by impressed German soldiers. Fact 69. By the war's end, the United States had mobilized over 4 million military personnel. American industrial power and fresh troops were crucial in tipping the balance against Germany. Fact 70. The American involvement was relatively brief but significant. About 116,000 American soldiers died, roughly half from combat and half from disease, particularly the 1918 flu pandemic. The collapse of empires. Fact 71. The Russian Revolution of 1917 took Russia out of the war. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany in March 1918, surrendering vast territories. Fact 72. The collapse of Russia initially seemed like a huge advantage for Germany, allowing them to transfer troops to the Western Front. However, it also meant Germany had to garrison occupied territories in the east. Fact 73. The Austro-Hungarian Empire began to disintegrate in 1918 as various ethnic groups declared independence. The empire that had started the war ceased to exist by its end. Fact 74. The Ottoman Empire also collapsed during the war. Turkish forces fought on multiple fronts and suffered defeats in Mesopotamia, Palestine, and Arabia before signing an armistice in October 1918. Fact 75. The German monarchy fell in the final days of the war. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated on November 9, 1918, and fled to the Netherlands, where he lived in exile until his death in 1941. The final year. Fact 76. Germany launched a series of desperate offensives in the spring of 1918, known as the Spring Offensive or Kaiserschlacht. They made significant gains but couldn't achieve a decisive breakthrough. Fact 77. The Spring Offensive exhausted Germany's remaining resources. When the Allies counterattacked in the summer of 1918, German forces began to steadily retreat. Fact 78. The Hundred Days Offensive, beginning in August 1918, saw a series of Allied victories that pushed German forces back. This period marked the beginning of the end for Germany. Fact 79. Germany faced increasing unrest at home. Naval mutinies, strikes, and food shortages undermined the war effort. By October 1918, the German High Command realized the war was lost. Fact 80. The armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, at 5 a.m. in a railway car in the forest of Compiègne. It came into effect at 11 a.m., leading to the symbolism of the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Fact 81. Fighting continued right up until 11 a.m. on November 11th. Tragically, the last soldier killed was American Henry Gunther, who died at 10:59 a.m., just 1 minute before the armistice took effect. Fact 82. When the guns finally fell silent, soldiers on both sides emerged from their trenches in disbelief. Some shook hands with their former enemies across no man's land. The Treaty of Versailles. Fact 83. The Paris Peace Conference began in January 1919, bringing together representatives from the Allied powers to determine the terms of peace. Germany was not invited to participate in negotiations. Fact 84. The Big Four dominated the conference. Woodrow Wilson of the United States, David Lloyd George of Britain, Georges Clemenceau of France, and Vittorio Orlando of Italy. Fact 85. President Wilson proposed his 14 points as a blueprint for peace, including the creation of a League of Nations. However, many of his idealistic goals were compromised during negotiations. Fact 86. The Treaty of Versailles placed full blame for the war on Germany and its allies in the famous War Guilt Clause, Article 231. This moral condemnation was deeply resented in Germany. Fact 87. Germany was required to pay enormous reparations, eventually set at 132 billion gold marks, roughly equivalent to $442 billion in today's money. These payments crippled the German economy. Fact 88. Germany lost all its overseas colonies and significant European territory. Alsace-Lorraine was returned to France. The Polish corridor was created, giving Poland access to the sea, and the Rhineland was demilitarized. Fact 89. The German military was severely restricted. The army was limited to 100,000 men, conscription was forbidden, and Germany was prohibited from having an air force or submarines. Fact 90. Many historians argue that the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh, humiliating Germany and creating conditions that would eventually lead to the rise of Adolf Hitler and World War II. Fact 91. The United States Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, and America never joined the League of Nations. This was a bitter defeat for President Wilson's vision of collective security. Lasting impact. Fact 92. World War I redrew the map of Europe and the Middle East. New nations emerged, including Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and others carved from the ruins of empires. Fact 93. The war accelerated social changes, including women's suffrage. Women's contributions to the war effort strengthened arguments for voting rights, which were granted in many countries after the war. Fact 94. The war had a profound cultural impact. The lost generation of writers like Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Eric Maria Remarque created works reflecting the disillusionment and trauma of the war. Fact 95. War memorials and remembrance became important traditions. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, symbolic graves honoring unidentified fallen soldiers, were established in many nations. Fact 96. Poppies became a symbol of remembrance, inspired by the poem In Flanders Fields by Canadian physician John McCrae. The image of red poppies growing on former battlefields became iconic. Fact 97. The economic cost of the war was staggering, estimated at over $300 billion in 1914 dollars. The debt burden and economic disruption contributed to the Great Depression of the 1930s. Fact 98. The war demonstrated the devastating potential of modern industrial warfare. The horrific casualties and destruction influenced military thinking, diplomacy, and pacifist movements for decades. Fact 99. World War I destroyed the optimistic belief in inevitable human progress that had characterized the pre-war era. The idealism of the 19th century gave way to modernist cynicism and existential questioning. Fact 100. Despite being called the war to end all wars, World War I set the stage for even greater conflict. The unresolved tensions, harsh peace terms, and political instability it created led directly to World War II just 21 years later. Unusual weapons and tactics. Fact 101. Soldiers used clubs and melee weapons in trench raids. These trench clubs were often homemade, studded with nails, and designed for brutal close-quarters combat in the confined spaces of enemy trenches. Fact 102. The Germans developed a Flammenwerfer, or flame projector, as early as 1901, but it was first used in combat in 1915. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical damage. Fact 103. Carrier pigeons were extensively used to carry messages. A pigeon named Cher Ami saved nearly 200 American soldiers by delivering a message despite being shot, losing an eye and a leg in the process. Fact 104. Dogs served in many roles during the war. They carried messages, laid telegraph wire, detected mines, found wounded soldiers, and even pulled machine guns on small carts. Fact 105. Listening posts were set up in no man's land where soldiers would lie silently, trying to overhear enemy conversations or detect tunneling operations. This was incredibly dangerous work. Fact 106. Both sides dug extensive tunnel systems beneath enemy trenches and detonated massive mines. The explosion at Messina's Ridge in 1917 involved 19 mines containing nearly 1 million pounds of explosives. Fact 107. The Messina's Ridge explosion was so powerful it was reportedly heard in London, over 140 miles away. The blast killed an estimated 10,000 German soldiers instantly. Fact 108. Snipers became highly specialized. German snipers were particularly effective, and both sides developed elaborate camouflage techniques and dummy heads to draw out enemy sharpshooters. Fact 109. The British developed the Livens projector, a simple mortar that could launch drums filled with poison gas. These could be fired in large batteries, saturating an area with toxic chemicals. Fact 110. Soldiers on both sides sometimes used sniper scopes, primitive rifle scopes and periscopes attached to weapons, allowing them to shoot over the trench parapet without exposing themselves. Life in the trenches. Fact 111. The daily rum ration was considered essential for British troops. Each soldier received a tot of rum before going over the top or after particularly harsh conditions. Some soldiers treasured it while others despised it. Fact 112. Trench art became a widespread practice. Soldiers would craft items from spent shell casings, bullets, and other war debris, creating everything from letter openers to intricate vases. Fact 113. Soldiers developed their own slang. Blighty meant home or England. A blighty wound was an injury serious enough to send you home but not permanently disable you, and going west meant dying. Fact 114. The periscope rifle allowed soldiers to shoot without exposing themselves. A mirror periscope was attached to the rifle, with a string or rod to pull the trigger from below the trench line. Fact 115. Soldiers sometimes observed informal truces for practical reasons. Artillery units might not shell during mealtimes, and both sides would pause firing to allow stretcher bearers to collect the wounded. Fact 116. The smell in the trenches was overwhelming. It was a mixture of unwashed bodies, rotting corpses, poison gas, latrine pits, and stagnant mud. Veterans said you could smell the front line miles away. Fact 117. Stand to was the routine at dawn and dusk when attacks were most likely. All soldiers had to be at their positions with weapons ready, often for an hour or more. Fact 118. Trench foot could develop in as little as 12 hours. To prevent it, soldiers were ordered to change their socks regularly and apply whale oil to their feet, though supplies were often insufficient. Fact 119. Mail from home was incredibly important for morale. The British Postal Service delivered millions of letters and packages to the front. A letter could reach France from Britain in just 2 days. Fact 120. Soldiers made pets of animals they found. Cats kept rat populations down, dogs provided companionship, and there are even accounts of soldiers keeping rabbits, birds, and in one case, a bear. Medical horrors and innovations. Fact 121. The Thomas splint, a simple device to immobilize broken legs, reduced the mortality rate of femur fractures from 80% to 20%. It's still used in emergency medicine today. Fact 122. Mobile X-ray units were developed and deployed near the front lines. Marie Curie herself helped equip vehicles with X-ray equipment, personally driving them to the front. Fact 123. Blood transfusions became practical during World War I. Doctors discovered that adding sodium citrate prevented blood from clotting, allowing it to be stored and transported to where it was needed. Fact 124. The practice of triage was formalized during the war. Wounded soldiers were sorted into categories: those who would die regardless of treatment, those who would survive regardless, and those who needed immediate attention. Fact 125. Tetanus was a major killer in the early war. Soldiers wounded by shells that churned up manure-filled French soil frequently contracted the disease. Tetanus antitoxin reduced deaths dramatically. Fact 126. Trench nephritis was a kidney disease caused by the cold, wet conditions. Soldiers' kidneys would fail, causing death or permanent disability. Fact 127. Dentistry advanced significantly. The enormous number of facial injuries meant dentists worked closely with surgeons to create prosthetics and reconstruct jaws and teeth. Fact 128. The mask of anesthesia was refined during the war. Gas and air anesthesia became more sophisticated, allowing longer and more complex surgeries. Fact 129. Reconstructive surgery wasn't just physical. Some soldiers received painted tin masks to cover horrific facial disfigurement. These masks were custom-made and hand-painted to match the wearer's skin tone. Fact 130. The Karel-Dakin method involved continuously flushing wounds with an antiseptic solution. This dramatically reduced infection rates and saved countless limbs from amputation. Espionage and intelligence. Fact 131. Mata Hari, the exotic dancer and courtesan, was executed by the French in 1917 for allegedly spying for Germany. Modern historians debate whether she was actually a significant spy or a scapegoat. Fact 132. The British intelligence service broke German codes throughout the war. Room 40 at the Admiralty was responsible for intercepting and decoding German radio messages, including the Zimmermann telegram. Fact 133. Edith Cavell was a British nurse in German-occupied Belgium who helped Allied soldiers escape. She was arrested and executed by firing squad in 1915, becoming a propaganda martyr. Fact 134. The White Lady was a Belgian resistance network that provided intelligence to the British. At its peak, it had over 1,000 members and provided crucial information about German troop movements. Fact 135. Invisible ink was widely used by spies. Common substances included lemon juice, milk, and even bodily fluids, which could be revealed by heating or chemical treatment. Fact 136. The Germans employed saboteurs in America before U.S. entry into the war. The Black Tom explosion in July 1916 destroyed ammunition depots in New Jersey, killing several people. Fact 137. Agents used codes hidden in ordinary letters. The first letter of each word might spell out a message, or prearranged phrases could signal specific information. Fact 138. Aerial reconnaissance revolutionized intelligence gathering. Thousands of photographs were taken from aircraft, analyzed, and used to create detailed maps of enemy positions. Fact 139. The Germans used Operation Albrecht to infiltrate Russian revolutionaries, including Lenin, back into Russia to destabilize the country and take it out of the war. Fact 140. Agent Fräulein Doctor was rumored to be a German spymaster who ran networks across Europe. Her real identity remains disputed, but she became a legendary figure in intelligence circles. Naval warfare. Fact 141. The Battle of Jutland in May 1916 was the largest naval battle of the war. Over 250 ships and 100,000 men were involved. Both sides claimed victory. Fact 142. British battlecruisers proved vulnerable at Jutland. 3 exploded catastrophically when German shells penetrated their magazines, killing thousands instantly. Fact 143. German U-boats sank over 5,000 Allied ships during the war. At the peak of the campaign, submarines were sinking over 300,000 tons of shipping per month. Fact 144. The convoy system, where merchant ships traveled in groups protected by warships, dramatically reduced submarine losses. It was initially resisted but proved essential. Fact 145. Q-ships were disguised merchant vessels that hid weapons. When a U-boat surfaced to sink them with deck guns, the Q-ship would reveal its armaments and attack. Fact 146. The German High Seas Fleet spent most of the war in port after Jutland. This strategy of fleet in being tied up British naval resources but meant Germany never achieved naval superiority. Fact 147. Naval mines were a constant danger. Both sides laid hundreds of thousands of mines in shipping lanes. Many remained dangerous decades after the war ended. Fact 148. The Zeebrugge raid in April 1918 was a British attempt to block German U-boat bases in Belgium. Although costly and only partially successful, it was celebrated as a daring exploit. Fact 149. Seaplanes and flying boats were used for naval reconnaissance and anti-submarine patrol. They could cover vast areas of ocean that surface ships couldn't reach. Fact 150. The blockade of Germany by the British Royal Navy was highly effective. By 1918, German civilians were starving, with hundreds of thousands dying from malnutrition-related causes. Air war developments. Fact 151. Early aircraft observers would drop modified steel darts called flechettes on enemy troops below. A single aircraft could carry hundreds of these deadly projectiles. Fact 152. Pilots initially had no parachutes because military leaders feared pilots would abandon expensive aircraft too readily. Thousands of airmen burned to death in crashes because of this policy. Fact 153. The Fokker scourge of 1915 to 1916 gave Germany air superiority. The Fokker Eindecker had a synchronized machine gun that could fire through the propeller, a significant tactical advantage. Fact 154. Observation balloons were used extensively but were extremely vulnerable. Pilots who specialized in shooting them down were called balloon busters and were highly decorated. Fact 155. Strategic bombing began during World War I. German Zeppelins and later Gotha bombers raided London and other British cities, killing hundreds of civilians and causing panic. Fact 156. The first aerial dogfight occurred when pilots started shooting at each other with pistols and rifles. This quickly evolved into mounted machine guns and specialized fighter aircraft. Fact 157. Ace pilot Albert Ball was famous for his aggressive tactics. He would fly beneath enemy aircraft and fire upward into their blind spot. He was killed at age 20 with 44 victories. Fact 158. Canadian pilot Billy Bishop claimed 72 victories, though some have questioned the veracity of his claims. Regardless, he was one of the war's most celebrated aces. Fact 159. French ace Georges Guynemer became a national hero with 53 victories before being shot down at age 22. His body was never found, and legend said he flew so high he could not come down. Fact 160. The average life expectancy of a British pilot on the Western Front was just 3 weeks during the height of combat in 1917. Propaganda and media. Fact 161. The Creel Committee in the United States produced propaganda to build support for the war. They created posters, films, and organized 4-minute men who gave short pro-war speeches. Fact 162. Atrocity propaganda was widespread. Stories of Germans bayoneting babies and cutting off children's hands were circulated, though most were fabrications or exaggerations. Fact 163. The British Bryce Report detailed alleged German atrocities in Belgium. While some events were true, the report was heavily embellished to inflame anti-German sentiment. Fact 164. Hollywood produced its first war propaganda films. Movies like The Kaiser, The Beast of Berlin portrayed Germans as monsters and encouraged American patriotism. Fact 165. War correspondents were carefully controlled. Their reports were censored, and they were rarely allowed near actual combat. The public had a sanitized view of the war. Fact 166. Soldiers' letters home were censored by officers. Anything that might reveal military information or damage morale was removed or blacked out. Fact 167. Postcards were pre-printed with acceptable phrases that soldiers could check off. This sped up mail processing and ensured nothing sensitive was revealed. Fact 168. Newspapers published casualty lists daily. Families would anxiously scan the names, dreading seeing their loved ones listed among the dead or wounded. Fact 169. War artists were commissioned to document the conflict. While censored, artists like Paul Nash created powerful works showing the devastation of the battlefield. Fact 170. The phrase, "over there," from George M. Cohan's song became an American rallying cry. The song sold millions of copies and boosted recruitment and morale. Colonial forces and minorities. Fact 171. Over 140,000 Chinese laborers served behind British and French lines. They dug trenches, built roads, and handled logistics, performing dangerous work under harsh conditions. Fact 172. The French recruited hundreds of thousands of troops from their African colonies. Senegalese tirailleurs were feared as fierce fighters and often used as shock troops. Fact 173. Native Americans served in the U.S. military at a higher rate than any other ethnic group. Many used their native languages as code on the battlefield, predating the famous Navajo code talkers of World War II. Fact 174. Over 15,000 South African soldiers died during the war, many in campaigns in East and Southwest Africa against German colonial forces. Fact 175. The West India Regiment and other Caribbean units served on several fronts. Despite their service, these soldiers faced discrimination both during and after the war. Fact 176. Vietnamese, Algerian, and Moroccan troops all served in the French army. The war gave many colonial subjects their first exposure to European society and planted seeds of independence movements. Fact 177. African American soldiers served in segregated units in the U.S. Army. The 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters, spent 191 days in combat, more than any other American unit. Fact 178. The Harlem Hellfighters never lost a man to capture or a trench to the enemy. They were awarded the French Croix de Guerre for their bravery. Fact 179. Despite their military service, African American veterans returned home to continued segregation, discrimination, and violence during the Red Summer of 1919. Fact 180. Maori soldiers from New Zealand served at Gallipoli and the Western Front. They performed their haka war dance before battles, which terrified and confused enemy soldiers. Strange but true. Fact 181. The Christmas Truce of 1914 saw British and German soldiers emerge from trenches to exchange gifts, sing carols, and even play football. Officers on both sides were horrified and ensured it never happened again on such a scale. Fact 182. A football kicked into no man's land during the Christmas Truce was found decades later, encrusted with mud and barbed wire, now displayed in a museum. Fact 183. Soldiers sometimes captured enemy soldiers and kept them in their trenches temporarily, sharing food and cigarettes before sending them back as a goodwill gesture. Fact 184. The youngest British soldier was Sidney Lewis, who enlisted at age 12 by lying about his age. He served on the Somme before his true age was discovered and he was sent home. Fact 185. There are accounts of soldiers finding creative ways to avoid combat, including deliberately shooting themselves in the foot. This was called a self-inflicted wound, or blighty wound. Fact 186. Some soldiers were executed by their own side for cowardice or desertion. The British executed 306 soldiers, many of whom were likely suffering from shell shock. Fact 187. A German soldier named Friedrich Ratzmann captured a British soldier but let him go, saying he didn't want to kill before Christmas. That British soldier was allegedly the uncle of a future officer. Fact 188. Soldiers would sometimes hold up signs in the trenches with messages to the enemy, ranging from taunts to requests for ceasefires to collect the dead. Fact 189. In one incident, both sides stopped fighting to watch an aerial dogfight above them, cheering for the maneuvers like spectators at a sporting event. Fact 190. Wild horses that escaped from military service formed herds in no man's land. Some survived the war and their descendants allegedly roamed the area for years after. Post-war consequences. Fact 201. The lost generation of young men created a severe gender imbalance in Europe. Millions of women who would have married could not find husbands, changing social dynamics. Fact 202. War memorials sprang up in virtually every town in Europe. These became focal points for remembrance and often listed the names of every local person who died. Fact 203. Disabled veterans became a visible reminder of the war's cost. Hundreds of thousands of men returned with missing limbs, disfigured faces, or psychological trauma. Fact 204. The war accelerated the decline of the British aristocracy. Many aristocratic families lost heirs and had to sell estates. The old social order never fully recovered. Fact 205. Inflation devastated Germany in the early 1920s. At its peak, a wheelbarrow of money was needed to buy a loaf of bread. Savings became worthless overnight. Fact 206. The mandate system divided former Ottoman and German territories among Allied powers. This artificial drawing of borders in the Middle East created problems that persist today. Fact 207. The war directly caused four major empires to fall: the Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires. The map of Europe and the Middle East was completely redrawn. Fact 208. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 to 1919 was worsened by the war. Troop movements spread the disease globally, and crowded military camps and ships became incubators. Fact 209. More U.S. servicemen died of the flu than combat. The disease killed approximately 675,000 Americans, while battle deaths were around 53,000. Fact 210. France suffered disproportionate destruction. 10 northern French departments were devastated, with towns completely destroyed and agricultural land rendered useless by craters and unexploded ordnance. Forgotten fronts. Fact 211. The Persian campaign saw British and Russian forces fighting Ottoman and German forces in modern-day Iran and Iraq. Control of oil fields was a major objective. Fact 212. The Siege of Kut in Mesopotamia was a humiliating British defeat. After a 147-day siege, 13,000 British and Indian soldiers surrendered to Ottoman forces in 1916. Fact 213. The Battle of Tanga in East Africa was an embarrassing British defeat by German forces. Swarms of aggressive bees attacked both sides, adding to the chaos. Fact 214. The Caucasus campaign between Russia and the Ottoman Empire was fought in brutal mountain conditions. Both sides suffered enormous casualties from combat and exposure. Fact 215. The Italian front saw some of the war's most difficult fighting. 11 battles were fought along the Isonzo River, with hundreds of thousands of casualties for minimal gains. Fact 216. The Romanian campaign was disastrous for Romania. Within 4 months of entering the war in 1916, most of the country was occupied by Central Powers forces. Fact 217. Japan seized German possessions in China and the Pacific with minimal fighting. These territorial gains would have significant implications for future conflicts. Fact 218. The Macedonian Front, also called the Salonika Front, was where Bulgaria was eventually defeated. Allied forces broke through in September 1918, helping end the war. Fact 219. Naval operations on the Great Lakes involved U.S. and British ships monitoring German submarine technology that might threaten shipping routes. Fact 220. The siege warfare tactics used in the Dardanelles campaign were eerily similar to those on the Western Front, showing how the war's fundamental problems appeared everywhere. Heroes and legends. Fact 221. Sergeant Alvin York single-handedly captured 132 German soldiers in October 1918. Initially a conscientious objector, he became America's most famous war hero. Fact 222. Edith Cavell's execution by the Germans made her a martyr. Patriotism is not enough, were her famous last words, highlighting the tragedy of nationalism. Fact 223. The Angel of Mons was an alleged supernatural phenomenon where British soldiers claimed to have seen angelic figures protecting them during the retreat from Mons in 1914. Fact 224. Captain Charles Hazlitt Upham from New Zealand earned the Victoria Cross twice. He was one of only 3 people ever to receive this honor twice. Fact 225. Flora Sandys was a British woman who actually fought as a soldier in the Serbian army. She was wounded in combat and promoted to the rank of sergeant major. Fact 226. Ekaterina Teodoroiu was a Romanian woman who became a combat officer. She was killed in battle at age 23 and became a national heroine. Fact 227. The White Mouse, Nancy Wake, was a nurse during World War I who later became a legendary World War II resistance fighter. Her World War I experiences shaped her later heroism. Fact 228. Jack Churchill's father fought in World War I. Jack himself would become famous in World War II for fighting with a longbow and sword, perhaps influenced by his father's stories. Fact 229. Ernst Junger, German soldier and writer, was wounded 14 times and awarded Germany's highest military honor. His memoir, Storm of Steel, became a classic. Fact 230. Arthur Guy Empey was an American who joined the British Army before U.S. entry. His book, Over the Top, gave Americans a realistic view of trench warfare. Cultural impact. Fact 231. The war popularized the wristwatch for men. Before World War I, wristwatches were considered feminine jewelry, but military necessity made them masculine and practical. Fact 232. Trench coats were literally designed for trench warfare. The military gabardine coats kept officers dry and warm and became a lasting fashion staple. Fact 233. The term basket case originated from World War I, referring to soldiers who lost all 4 limbs and had to be carried in baskets. The term is now used more broadly. Fact 234. Shell shock entered the vocabulary, bringing awareness to psychological trauma. Though understanding was limited, it was progress in recognizing mental health. Fact 235. Jazz music spread internationally partly through African American military bands. The music became popular in Europe and was adopted globally. Fact 236. Modernist art movements were deeply influenced by the war. Dadaism emerged as a reaction to the senseless destruction, rejecting traditional artistic values. Fact 237. War poetry reached new heights with poets like Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, and Rupert Brooke. Their work captured the horror and futility of war. Fact 238. The phrase, over the top, entered common usage, meaning excessive or going beyond what's necessary, derived from going over the trench parapet into battle. Fact 239. No man's land became a metaphor for any dangerous, contested, or abandoned space, taken directly from the barren ground between opposing trenches. Fact 240. The concept of the unknown soldier created a powerful symbol. These tombs honored all who died and were never identified, representing collective sacrifice. Final moments and aftermath. Fact 241. Kaiser Wilhelm II lived in exile in the Netherlands until 1941. He never returned to Germany and witnessed the rise of Hitler with mixed feelings. Fact 242. The last surviving veteran of World War I was Florence Green, a British woman who served in the Royal Air Force. She died in 2012 at age 110. Fact 243. The last combat veteran was Claude Schul, who died in 2011 at age 110. He served in the Royal Navy and witnessed the scuttling of the German fleet. Fact 244. Many veterans refused to speak about their experiences. The horror they witnessed was too traumatic, and they felt others couldn't understand. Fact 245. Bonus Army veterans marched on Washington, D.C. in 1932, demanding early payment of promised bonuses. They were violently dispersed by U.S. Army troops. Fact 246. The railway car where the armistice was signed was brought out of a museum by Hitler in 1940. He forced France to sign their surrender in the same car in the same location. Fact 247. Unexploded ordnance still kills people today. French farmers regularly find shells in their fields, and bomb disposal teams are kept busy over a century later. Fact 248. The Zone Rouge in France remains largely uninhabitable. The soil is so contaminated with arsenic and unexploded shells that nothing can be built there. Fact 249. Approximately 600 million shells were fired during the war. An estimated 10 to 15% failed to explode, leaving millions of live shells still buried. Fact 250. The Iron Harvest is the annual discovery of unexploded ordnance in France and Belgium. Farmers pile these deadly relics by roadsides for disposal teams. Lasting lessons. Fact 251. World War I proved that defensive technology had outpaced offensive capability. Machine guns, barbed wire, and artillery made attacking incredibly costly. Fact 252. The war showed the importance of logistics. Supplying millions of soldiers with food, ammunition, and equipment was as important as tactical brilliance. Fact 253. Chemical weapons were ultimately deemed too unreliable and horrific. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 banned their use, though development continued. Fact 254. The war demonstrated the vulnerability of civilian populations. Strategic bombing and blockades brought the war home to non-combatants in unprecedented ways. Fact 255. National identity was strengthened by the war. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand emerged with stronger senses of nationhood separate from Britain. Fact 256. The war accelerated the end of European imperialism. Colonial subjects who fought for their rulers began demanding independence and self-determination. Fact 257. Military aviation went from curiosity to essential within 4 years. By 1918, aircraft were doing reconnaissance, fighting, and bombing, roles they still perform today. Fact 258. The concept of total war emerged. Every aspect of society and economy was mobilized for the war effort, blurring the lines between combatant and civilian. Fact 259. War memorials and remembrance ceremonies became important national rituals. November 11th is still observed as a day of remembrance in many countries. Fact 260. The phrase, "never again," echoed after the war, yet failed to prevent future conflicts. The lessons learned were insufficient to prevent an even more devastating war just 21 years later. Conclusion. And there you have it, 200 facts about World War I that show just how complex, tragic, and far-reaching this conflict truly was. From the trenches of France to the deserts of Arabia, from the innovations that saved lives to the weapons that took them, the First World War touched every aspect of human civilization. The soldiers who fought in this war came from every continent, spoke hundreds of languages, and believed they were fighting for causes worth dying for. Whether they were right or wrong, their sacrifice shaped the world we live in today. The maps they fought over have changed, the empires they served have fallen, but the lessons of their war remain relevant. We study World War I not just to remember the past, but to understand the present and hopefully avoid repeating the mistakes that led to such catastrophic loss of life. The Great War was supposed to be the war to end all wars, but instead, it planted the seeds for even greater conflicts to come. If you found these facts interesting, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Check out our first video on 100 facts about the Roman Empire if you haven't already. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any facts you think we should have included. Thanks for watching, and remember, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.